Welcome to Strong Uncut, VIPCO podcast episode 4. I'm Jason Impey, independent filmmaker, joined as ever with
James Simpson, author, former film critic, and all-round tosser.
and this week we're talking about a film that you're quite fond of, aren't you? This is one of your favourite ones.
When you were growing up, the boogeyman was just a fantasy.
It had its own power.
The boogeyman. The boogeyman. He's here, now. By the time they believe in him, it will be too late. The Boogeyman. Rated R.
Classic VIPCO, the attention-grabbing sleeve of the VHS, which I know probably wasn't a VIPCO creation, but VIPCO capitalised on it. And for years I wanted to really see this film, and it wasn't until I was probably 18 or 19 I finally got to see The Boogeyman. But it holds a very special place in my heart as a VIPCO fan.
I first saw this film years ago, actually on the pre-cert VHS, the VIPCO pre-certs. I saw it in a cool way, but it was a film that was on my radar for years because my mum used to always go on about it. She was quite a horror film fan in her youth and always used to say that one stood out and left a mark on her because it was quite atmospheric, and she always went on about the screwdriver scene in the car, so I was quite geared up to see it, and I did really enjoy it when I watched it. And I always remember that cover, the VIPCO cover with the priest with the crucifix on the front and the blood coming down his head.
The front cover is just that. It still is awesome to me today. For those of you who are listening who haven't seen it, then you should see it, and those that you who are listening that have seen it, you'll know what I mean. It's the character of Father Riley, played by actor Lewin Thomas, and he's got a crucifix, light shining off the crucifix, and he's also sort of bathed in a weird green, yellowy glow. He's got a utter look of shock on his face as blood trickles down his face. And from the looks of the VIPCO sleeve, maybe it's been touched up a bit as well, but it's a striking image.
It definitely is. I mean, it stands out amongst their catalogue, and the film itself, I think, is one of their more slicker titles, actually. It is even though it's an independent horror film, it's a bit more slickly made than some of the others on their catalogue.
Jason, I think you've got the pre-cert VHS of this. The back cover for the pre-cert VHS is just as mad as the front.
Yes, I do, yeah.
There's a picture on the back of a guy with a pitchfork impaled through his neck. There's a young Willie, blood splattered as he's about to stab somebody. There's a couple of shots of Susanna Lowe, one with the frivolous scene where she's got a piece of the broken mirror reflecting light off of her face. Also, Susanna Love tied up with a bra on show. Probably Mike Lee loved that scene the most. And then there's a scene where you don't see your nipples, by the way, per fans, but there's a still on the back of the sleeve of the scene where the girl gets stabbed in the shower with her boobs out.
I mean, it's an interesting one because although it ended up on the Nasties list and was another one of the Nasties, it actually it came back out on DVD quite quick for VIPCO, and it was uncut. It never had any censorship issues apart from the nasty scandal and era of being banned for a while. It never suffered any cuts on its reissue.
It was banned originally. Mike did re-release it in '92 in VHS. There was a bit of a cut, I think for that scene I've just mentioned, actually, the scene with the woman in the shower topless. But then
on the VHS, yeah, but the DVD, wasn't it, was intact.
Yeah, well, that came out in 2000, and it's quite rare for VIPCO to have a form of video nasty that actually was uncut. But The Boogeyman, I'd say actually out of all the video nasties, that was one of the first to be released uncut relatively shortly after the scandal, because some films, it took until 2010, 2015 to be re-released uncut. But the BBFC were quite happy in 2000 to let VIPCO release The Boogeyman on DVD uncut.
I find interesting about that one as well is the Boogeyman never actually made it to the Scream Time collection. It was always released on its DVD with the full artwork intact and case, and never ended up on the black case with the gold writing.
Well, Mike Lee, and we've mentioned it before, Mike Lee would often put movies that he didn't like or felt underperformed for VIPCO on the Scream Time collection with that horrible front cover. However, there were some of his favourites or big sellers that did get that treatment. So maybe Mike's got a bit confused there, or forgotten or remembered things wrong, I should say. But the Boogeyman never appeared on screen time. You would have thought, considering that he re-released the Boogeyman on DVD in 2000 when he started doing the screen time collection a lot, which the peak years were 2004 to 2006. You thought by then he would have cashed in and re-released the Boogeyman on screen time collection.
Yeah, I was quite surprised, but I know you can tell he likes Bogeyman because of that said the DVD indent at the beginning of each disc has, like, with the logo, has a clip from Bogeyman on it with, like, the priest in it. So he obviously loved that image and loved the film to actually extract some of it to use for his logo.
Well, it was in the late 80s that I first saw that ident you were talking about, and it seemed to be every ad break when I was watching the film late night on the Sci-Fi Channel. Every ad break would have that advert, and every time it came on, I was fascinated, but especially because of that shot of the priest with the blood dripping down his head. So Mike's advert worked, but also it worked so much that we felt, or Jason especially, who mentioned it first, that we felt as the audio for the opening of this podcast, we'd have that ident play.
Yeah, it's just really iconic, isn't it? Like, I used to, you said when I was collecting them, I used to be very excited when I put a disc in and saw that come up, because it normally meant you was in for a good fun time of some gore and fun horror. Really, you kind of, as he said, what you got was on the tin, really.
Speaking of the tin, looking at the synopsis here on the back of the pre-cert VHS, Mike's in full hyper mode here. At one point, he calls the story of the Boogeyman a chilling story of concentrated evil, which is quite the claim. There's no diluted evil here; it's concentrated.
Mike had a way with words. He was funny, like especially with the it was the VHSs he released post pre-cert that made me laugh. You know, where he has, like, at the bottom of the spine he would, like, label them, and he had, like, sicko, horror, gore, and some of the captions used on those were very amusing, actually.
Shockwaves was actually released. It was part of the cult classic line, which was a rip-off of the Coca-Cola logo. And beneath that, he'd have a word or two words he felt best summed up the film. That's what Jason's referring to. And my favourite is Shockwaves, which is about zombie Nazis. And Mike Lee labelled that cult classic video Nazi.
That is brilliant, though.
And I think Night of the Bloody Apes was released as cult classic Right Nana, something like that.
There's some genius ones. There's so many. I mean, when I did the documentary, I was looking at a very extensive collection someone had, and I was pounding across. And when you just see them all in line like that, it's just brilliant. And some of those shots are in the documentary as well. To give you a little taste, if you watch that, it is they stand out to this day. After all what's happened in the world of media and physical media, they still really stand out and leave quite an imprint. So he was onto something with that. They're very funny and cheesy, but they're memorable. You definitely remember them.
Yeah, well, Video Nasty Mayhem, my book, there's the plug. Video Nasty Mayhem, that does have a few of these cult classic logos appear kindly with the permission of Graham Humphreys, the legendary artist who actually designed these. He didn't want to design, and Mike Lee just told him to do it, despite the fact that if Coca-Cola found out their logo was ripped off, Graham Humphreys probably would have got it in the neck. But some of them do appear in Video Nasty Mayhem, if you want to know what we're talking about, or if you've got a VIPCO release from the early 90s yourself, just have a look. But in terms of the packaging for the Boogeyman, especially when it came to the 2000 DVD, Mike had blurbs all over it, uncut, as he always does if it was uncut, or even if it wasn't sometimes. But he actually has on the bottom of it, banned since 1982, which is a bit cheeky considering how Mike had actually sold the film in 1992. I'm assuming Mike's trying to say here, Boogeyman is banned since 1982 because the version you're seeing is uncut. The uncut version hasn't been made available since then. But Mike did sort of put the hype all over the packaging for that, not with it being just with it being uncut. But he's claiming it's been banned, which is probably his way of trying to encourage people to watch it as well by toying with people, the sort of rubbernecking a car crash thing of, if it's been banned, I want to see what that film is.
One of the reasons he had Bogeyman for so long is I did ask him how he did get, because some of his films, obviously, he had. See, Bogeyman's one of the ones he had back in the day, as with Driller Killer and Zombie Flesh Eaters. It was one of his original releases, and The Slayer. And he said basically he applied for rights extensions and most of the time got them. So Bogeyman was one of the ones he managed to get a rights extension on and held on to for a very long time.
It's the last known release by VIPCO was 2000, and although, as I said, I'm shocked he didn't release it a few years later on the Scream Time collection. Maybe he forgot to renew the rights, which is what he did with Zombie Flesh Eaters, or perhaps he was planning to re-release the Boogeyman on the Scream Time collection, but with the personal tragedy he suffered in 2006 and 2007, perhaps the Boogeyman was never meant to be re-released by VIPCO because that's when the firm closed.
He was quite funny with his catalogue, because I have a funny story regarding Cannibal Ferox. This is the kind of things that happened with titles he owned. He submitted Cannibal Ferox to the BBFC to get it censored, to get a certificate, and it was obviously going to be censored. And I had a dinner with with someone from the board actually, and they said that he must be on record for having a film in the board for the longest time, because something happened and he basically forgot that Cannibal Ferox had been submitted because it was such a troublesome title, and they were having trouble with it. He submitted it and left it in there, and several years went by. It was like 7 years, and the guy was sorting through the BBFC was sorting through the office and sorting through paperwork and films and stuff, and it appeared there that it was just. It'd been submitted, but never kind of been, like, the certificate had never been issued. He'd never dealt with it. So they rang Mike up and asked, does he still want to release this film? And he'd forgot he actually had that film and submitted it. And he goes, oh, you still got that? And he goes, wait a minute, let me check. And he actually he had to phone around and make sure he still had the rights or renew them. And he got back to the BBFC and goes, right, yeah, go ahead with it. I've got the rights. It's all clear. Just do what you can with it. And then it was like it was issued. But yeah, 7 years just sat in the closet at the BBFC gathering dust. So that's the kind of way some of the films are treated by him.
He takes great pride in how during the time scale, the time period actually of the Boogeyman being released uncut, Mike Lee took great pride in how these former video nasty titles he had in the 80s that were banned, come 2000, 2001, 2002, the BBFC were actually passing these films cut or uncut. And Mike seemed to think that just proved that he knew better than them all along.
He's a bit bitter about that. He kind of mocks that, the world we live in now, things are getting through uncut left, right and centre, and obviously a lot worse is getting through, and they outshine some of these so-called nasties. He definitely didn't agree with cuts and censorship, but he had a laugh with the BBFC. He said he had quite a good relationship with them because he was always in trouble with them and always having to deal with things. And he said he'd go down there and give them some freebies, ask if they wanted some DVDs that it had done. He said it weren't for bribing them or anything, but he was just trying to build a good relationship up with them. He said he even dated the woman at reception once on the BBFC, but that's another story apparently.
I was going to say, he must have been on some sort of speaking terms with them, because Mark Morris, the well-known film distributor and journalist, Mark Morris told me that he once met Mike Lee at a BBFC Christmas party. So Mike must have been in the good books with them to go to a Christmas party, or maybe he bribed his way into that as well.
I think he just gave them a lot of business and gave them a lot of money, to be honest.
But and also Mike's joked as well about how, especially when it came to Lucio Fulci films, that whenever VIPCO would submit a Fulci film to the BBFC, he used to joke that wherever he was, he could hear the sighs of despair coming from the BBFC because VIPCO had yet again submitted a Fulci film. Circling back to the Bogeyman, the fact that we spent so much time just talking about the sleeve of the VHS and then the sleeve of the DVD, I think it shows how, in a way, for any horror fans of 80s video nasties, that the height of the 80s excessive over-the-top horror films, I think with the fact we spent this long talking about something as minor as a front cover shows just how strong a film in terms of cult value that the Boogeyman is.
I'll say it's I mean, the covers for the old Nasties that he released were normally pretty good, and it's a shame that the black boxes and gold writing became quite a thing for him, but that was cost cutting. But as we said, amazingly, the Bogeyman never fell short of that. It always had good artwork, even in its re-release of video and DVD. I mean, it slightly varied a bit. He jazzed the cover up a bit more colour was put into it. It stood out even more. But my favourite is the preset image because it's much more dark and gloomy, and it kind of has a better feel for the film. But he definitely that green plays a big strong part in all the releases he put out for the Bogeyman, wasn't it? Really, the kind of green tint on it.
If you look closely as well, I've got my VHS preset copy here. I'm looking closely. You can tell that the blood that is on the face of Father Riley, it's been sort of helped, as it were. It looks like someone's got a red felt tip pen and added more to it, gone over the blood and added a few more trickles of blood down his face. So again, that's Mike probably thinking, this looks fucking great. I'll make it look even better.
The Bogeyman's definitely a kind of more tense, atmospheric film. It has got some good gore in it, but it's a bit more of a subtle kind of tense atmosphere film rather than your just standard gore fest that he had so much of.
Yeah, I think the director Lommel has said that he was trying to make a film that has atmosphere, which I think is as well plays into the reason why he filmed it where he did, which I believe is somewhere in Maryland on the east coast of America. But the Boogeyman, for the most part, it's not. There's not much gore in there. Most of the scary stuff, as it were, is just sort of flashbacks from Susanna Love's character Lacey, of seeing the sex creep, shall we call him, wearing tights, molesting, having sex with her mother, and the occasional deep breathing. And then it's towards the end where the gore and the violence really start to amp up.
I mean, it has got a good taboo in there for the time. They've done it since, but it's still quite taboo where they kill a young person in the film, don't they? When the young teenager appears through the bathroom window and the window comes down and crushes him. That's quite, you remember these things because it's more shocking when you kill a young person in a film rather than just your standard adult.
I mean, to be fair, that kid was a little shit. I mean, especially his sister's just been killed, and he's sticking his head in to look at her when she was naked. It's and also earlier on, he was being a little turd when he shouted "Boogeyman" out the window as well.
That's what happens when you're naughty. Lesson of a horror film: behave yourself.
Yeah, and also there's the typical sort of childhood trauma for Lacey and Willie. Lacey and Willie, brother and sisters. They were played by real life brother and sisters. Susanna Love and Nicholas Love, but Willie grows up to be the strong, silent type, as it were. And during the film, he's eventually going to crack and start speaking after some terrible traumas have happened. Speaking of Susanna Love, I mean, I'll be honest, Jason. As a young lad, I had a bit of a crush on Susanna Love, and I still have a crush on her now. I think her husband, director Lommel, clearly realised his wife was an asset in more ways than one. Because in the films that she starred in by him, more than not, he had her wearing very little or getting a kit off altogether.
He knew what sold. Typical horror filmmaker.
Watching this film, I've got it on VHS, I've got it on DVD, I've got it on Blu-ray. No matter how good the picture quality is, I just think, wow, Susanna Love is just gorgeous.
Have you got the '88 Blu-ray restored version? I
have, yes.
Yeah, no, I picked that up. It is exciting to see all these classics get the treatment and come back out. Because VIPCO, however good they were, there's nothing quite like seeing it all restored. But at the same time, it's really nice to go back to a VIPCO disc or even VHS and look at it in its kind of raw, rough state. Because there's something nostalgic about watching it like that as well. Those sort of films, it adds a bit of character and quality to them, seeing them in that sort of way. And I think people remember seeing a bit of a scratchy, roughed up copy, and it does actually add character to the film rather than seeing it all pristine. And although it's nice, it's still nice to hold on to those classic original release discs and even VHSs if you can.
Well, with the VHS, you could tell when a scary or gory bit was going to happen, or a bit of nudity, because the VHS was suddenly starting to get very fuzzy and the sound would be distorted because whoever's rented the film before you or had that VHS before you clearly rewound a certain part of the film many times just to rewatch a pair of exposed boobs or a violent death. Maybe that's just me when I was a teenager. And maybe now. By the by.
Well, everything's so much more accessible these days with the internet, right?
Yeah, so, you know, back when Jason and me were young horror fans, if you wanted to watch a horror film with nudity, you had to go and rent the actual videotape or get someone to rent it for you. Nowadays, you know, horror fans, they can just go on any website. Not that I want to sound like a moaning old perv. With Susanna Love, she, as mentioned, she was married at the time to the director, although there's a theory that she married him as a favour because he wanted a green card. He was German after all. She's American. And also, she was quite wealthy, I believe, at the time. I think she's from a wealthy family. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. And some people said she financed his films, although when they later divorced, she did marry somebody very wealthy and left the film world behind. But Susanna Love was married to the director at this time and helped co-write the film.
I mean, the film was so good for him. He did the sequel, Revenge of the Bogeyman, which is an odd one because it's kind of half the original film played again, isn't it, really?
Yeah, not to spoil it for anyone, but the sequel is Susanna Love's character, Lacey, talking about the events of the first film as if they've happened for real. And I believe there's going to be apparently a movie made of what happened in the first film, depicting the events of what she claimed is a real life attack or haunting or possession. And instead of just having her tell you what's happened or what could happen and then concentrating on the sequel just spends most of the time showing large chunks of the original film in place of doing anything else.
I mean, it's an easy, cheap way of getting a sequel made, really. But there is other edits of that film that exist as well, you know. But that's the original released pre-cert version of Revenge of the Bogeyman. But there is an alternate version now on DVD and like director's cut and stuff. But it is quite slated for being kind of, you know, if you've seen the Bogeyman, people say you've kind of seen the sequel as well because it kind of really is the same film.
I think there was also another sequel which happened in '94, Revenge of the Boogeyman, or Return of the Boogeyman, which again, that's not best remembered by horror fans, but there's also apparently for a while meant to be another film, this time with Lommel's involvement, about the Boogeyman, that is listed on IMDb, but it's been like that for a while. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, and it'd be interesting to see if there was going to be a related sequel to the Boogeyman, or even a remake that tries to capture the spirit of the original.
Yeah, because I mean, it's hard to. I think it's hard for a filmmaker or anyone to kind of remake, do a sequel, prequel to a film that, you know, like that the original Bogeyman is a good film, and to kind of try and cash in on it or to try and expand it is a tall order, because horror fans are quite brutal at the best of times, and whenever anyone is going to tamper with something that's already existent, which people like and have accepted, some people hate on it before you've even shot a shot. So it's a very hard job to please people. But, you know, The Bogeyman's another film where obviously a lot of publicity and attention was drawn to it because of it being a nasty. But having said that, I think The Bogeyman is one of the exceptions where even if it wasn't wrapped up in the nasty scandal, it would still have a cult following and be a strong contender in retro horror, because it is quite a slick, good film in its own merit. And, you know, the nasty scandal helped bring attention to it. It obviously helped VIPCO like some of the others did with Driller Killer and that, but I think Bogeyman was quite a strong film anyway and holds its own.
As I've said, to me, that I as a kid, I sort of knew of the Video Nasties. I heard about them from my friend at school who had an older brother that had them on VHS, and I also had cousins who were much older than me, about 10 years older than me, that would, when I used to go to my uncle and aunt's house, they used to take me up into the bedroom and show me stuff like Critters or Aliens on VHS, and then talk about these other really bad, insane horror films called Video Nasties. So I sort of knew what they were. I must admit, for a while, until I was probably 15, 16, I didn't know the Boogeyman was a Video Nasty. But the fact that I was so fascinated and wanted to see it just before I knew it was a nasty just because the front cover looks epic. And also, I knew it was on this company called VIPCO that did horror films that were meant to be amazing to watch. I wanted to watch The Boogeyman just because I thought it looks like a great film. And then I found out it was a video nasty. So part of me thought, oh, it's going to be really gory, which towards the end it is. But I think you're right, Jason. Take away the fact it's a video nasty, I think it'd be one of the films that would have survived and gained a reputation anyway, unlike other video nasties that only are remembered because they are a nasty and not because of the fact they're a good film.
I've read a lot about people's views on the nasties and stuff, and how a lot of people say, you know, a lot of the films are infamous now purely because they was on that list, and if it wasn't for that list, they would just have been forgotten, lost in obscurity. But I do notice that Bogeyman is not actually spoke about that much compared to a lot of the other films on the list, and a lot of the other films have had the treatments of late. Bogeyman never seems to be that discussed a lot, and kind of does seem to feel it gets left out a lot and doesn't really get the credit it's due.
I think it might be left out of the talk of video nasties because it's not as controversial as some of the other ones. We've covered zombie flesh eaters before. Driller Killer, those were clearly controversial as well, but there's other nasties that were controversial, not just for the gore, but how it was filmed or made, such as Cannibal Holocaust. Whereas The Boogeyman, I think anyone watching it, even a kid that supposedly could have watched this back in the 80s, I think it's safe to say you could tell it's just a silly, over-the-top horror film.
I think The Bogeyman's not so stupid as some of the other nasties. It's, as I say, it's much more intense and atmospheric and draws you in. There's not so many laugh-out loud moments or kind of fun moments. It's a great horror watch, but it's not kind of, you can take that film more serious than some of the other nasties. It's not so over-the-top and outrageous as what others have been.
We've touched upon some of the cast, mainly the brother-sister combo of Nicholas and Susanna Love. But there is an acting legend in The Bogeyman, whichever way you want to pronounce it, and that's John Carradine, who looks about 150 in the film and probably felt that by the time he finished filming his scenes.
It was a good name to have, and they do make quite a deal about him being part of the production.
I believe that they got him in because they wanted name value, and they got him in on the understanding, or because it's the only way they could do it, that they filmed his scenes in one day, which they managed to do. By this point, John Carradine, he's a legend. He's been in all sorts, and he would go on to be in all sorts of other legendary films that people listening to this podcast will probably have seen or at least heard of. But he's a legendary actor, and to see him in this film, it's a bit out of the way, but he was at the end of his career, so maybe he was doing it to keep himself busy in his old age.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of films, definitely a few films I know of have done this, and being in the industry, I've known of this, where people try desperately to get a name on board to production, even if it is a small glorified cameo, even if they have like limited time, like a day to use them, but they love to get them because then they can obviously publicise that. It means distributors are more likely to release it because you've got a name to sell it on, and you get like, you know, that name brings in their fan audience, so you kind of get a built audience. It's a very clever business tactic, and one that would appeal to someone such as Mike Leigh, because, you know, it's great to publicise. This is a great horror film, plus it's starring, you know, whoever it may be, and it's kind of guaranteed a few sales and gives it a good, you know, it's a little bit of free publicity for them down the road to do that.
Well, he would also, by this point, he had actually appeared in a film that would also go on to be a VIPCO release, which is Shockwaves, that we mentioned earlier. And I think, again, with Shockwaves, if you haven't seen it, you can tell John Carradine's inserted into that film for the reasons we've just spoke about here for this film. But he's done so much over his career that, like I said, we'll be all familiar with, even if we haven't seen him. So he's been in Silent Night, Bloody Night. He's been in The Moonchild, The Killer Inside, The Sentinel. This is just off a long list of films that are on IMDb. And after The Boogeyman, actually, he was going to be in the Howling movie. And to be honest, Jason, I was going to say The Howling. That's interesting because there's so many Howling films out there, but VIPCO didn't actually handle any of them. There's a lot of films or film franchises that you think a company like VIPCO would have handled, but seeing that John Carradine was in The Howling, and there's been 7 Howling films, or at least by the time when VIPCO was around, there was 5 or 6. It's quite strange that Mike Leigh never went for The Howling. Did he ever express any interest in any film franchises that we all know? Or?
And Mike did say there was quite a few films he did want, and he did try to get some and couldn't, but he did have his heart and mind set on some, and it just, it's a hard business where, another distributor may have signed him or offered a better deal, and but he thought Last House on the Left would have been good to have, which obviously it really would have been. He definitely said that was one on his radar for a while, but he couldn't get it. He did try, but yeah, he said there was tons of films out there, and he did try. He did try to get some other known films, especially from the Nasties list, but he did dominate throughout the early noughties, really, on DVD in the UK. He did manage to get a hell of a lot of a good collection together, but there wasn't that much competition back then when he was doing it, really. He was kind of like the only real true video nasty label in the UK, especially for that sort of content, so you kind of knew what you was getting with a VIPCO, and they all kind of sat there. But as I say, what's interesting is he started out just going into film distribution, wasn't completely hell-bent on just releasing horror. He tried his hand at the first thing he released was a special interest video on badminton, which was a disaster and didn't sell a copy, and then he was offered the softcore porn, which he grabbed, and that's a big market and a big seller anyway, so that started him off, and then straight from the 4 softcore titles was into Zombie Flesh Eaters, which is like a godfather of gore horror, and obviously that was so successful. Horror obviously was on his radar, that was a good area, fell into that. The Nasties made it infamous, and he jumped straight onto a marketing campaign, and Graham Humphreys did say, the artist of the some of the sleeves, and who obviously created the cult classic label logo design, he basically said that Mike had this attitude where VIPCO was a brand, he was buying into a brand. He was thinking, blokes at a pub on a Friday night having a drink, he'd be like, let's go home and put on a VIPCO and have a laugh with that. So he kind of saw his market, he kind of realised he was onto something, and went into the video nasty pioneer label, as he put it, of the day, and he fell into that. I mean, someone did say on my documentary when we were doing interviews, going, it is funny because if the badminton video had done really well, he may have been the ultimate label of special interest videos and DVDs of God knows what. It just happens that horror fell into his lap, and he kind of fell into that, and which is what got us to here to this day. So it was all a little bit of fate, fluke and luck, how it all kind of came about, everything, really.
Yeah, well, the introduction to badminton video, I've heard of it as well. I had included it in the book Video Nasty Mayhem, but my publisher said, you're very sketchy on this. You've hardly got any information on it other than hearsay. Don't include it. But for true VIPCO fans, you'll know that the first release was introducing badminton. It's listed on some websites, like VHS collector websites or preset websites, as a VIPCO release. But as Jason said there, it tanked, and then Mike decided to go into actual films.
It is impossible to get. You said that there are VIPCO completists that would kill and just would love this badminton video to complete the set, but Barry Gold said, the stockist, the warehouse stockist, said that he had a massive warehouse full of these badminton videos, and it just didn't sell at all. He says he didn't think he sold one copy, and he made them take it back. I can only imagine they were just destroyed and incinerated, really. So I think it would be near impossible to get a copy of a VIPCO badminton video, to be honest. I have looked myself, and I said, and then doing the documentary journey, I have spoke about it and brought it up, and I don't know anyone that has that, or I don't think it exists anymore. It is kind of like a myth, really, but it did exist. It is real. But if you'd get your hands on a copy, I'd love to know. If anyone wants to get in touch, if they actually have a copy of the VIPCO badminton video, I'd be amazed, to be honest with you. I'd love to see it.
That's probably because Jason wants to buy it for a large amount of money.
Yeah. Bankrupt myself even more on VIPCO collection.
But Yeah, like I said, I mentioned it in my book, and my publisher said there's very little information. That if you've researched this and you can't find information, only sort of word of mouth from people involved with VIPCO, I'm not happy to include it. So anyone who listens to this after reading the book, now you know why it's not mentioned. I think I might mention it in passing once, but anyway.
But it is like Bogeyman. It's got a green case. I can say that much. Just as the Bogeyman has, it is a green cased video.
I was going to say, I'm sure it was a carton packaging green affair. I'm sure I've seen it before, unless I'm making that up as well.
No, it's definitely green. It definitely does have a green case. That reminds me of Bogeyman, really. I say, because my mum always remembered the film and it was such a scary horror of all these scenes. And as you said, that the film isn't super gory, but I think people that saw it back in the day, and because of the case and the video nasty hype, people remember the Bogeyman as being quite a strong gory horror, when actually it is a good strong horror film, but it's not like an ultra gore fest. And I do think some people forget that because they just assume because it was a nasty, and they have these memories of the early horror films being outrageous. They remember it being like, this kill count and blood and gore, when obviously this day and age and stuff that's out now, Bogeyman's quite a tame film regarding gore.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially when you see things like Hostel came out decades later. And I know one of Hostel's sequels had their own problems, but eventually that was resolved when it came to the VBFC. There's so many films that are not only more gory, such as Hostel, but they've got more absurd and maybe disgusting and therefore offensive plot devices, such as the Human Centipede films. But that's why, looking as a hardened horror fan, looking back now in 2019 to what was happening in horror even in 1989, the video nasties seem even more frivolous, especially when you look at what was considered one of the worst culprits, the Boogeyman. As you said earlier, Jason, nowadays the Boogeyman's not even considered one of the worst, almost controversial, when people talk about the nasties.
There's not a lot in the Bogeyman that could get it into a great deal of trouble, really. I mean, as I say, it was just a hysteria. I mean, and I said back in the nasties, they were raiding loads of places and getting all kinds of titles. I mean, there was such a kerfuffle. They ended up grabbing The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing was picked off the shelves, which don't surprise me, because again, I think The Thing's quite a gory, nasty film. Probably a lot more gory and extreme than Bogeyman ever is, really. But there was a right old fiasco of what was on the nasties list and what was deemed unfit. And as I say, I'm quite surprised at Bogeyman, because I said I enjoyed it. I just found it tame for being a nasty. But I think it reminds me of Halloween, the original John Carpenter Halloween, because it's just got a build up and suspense. It's got quite a cool soundtrack. It's got a little bit of 80s synthesizer, which I love. And I just think it draws you in and creates a good atmosphere. And I think it's a well-made film. I said it's nicely shot and edited. It's very slick. It's a lot more technically advanced than some of the other VIPCO titles, and it's got a nice nostalgic feel to it as well. And it is a big thing for VIPCO because they are using a clip for the ident, and it was one of their first VHS releases in the pre-cert era, which they continued to hold the rights for and then reissue on DVD. If I think of Bogeyman, I definitely think of VIPCO. It's just one of those films. I always think of VIPCO with that film.
And also with the Boogeyman, you said it's a well-made film. For me personally, I think the cinematography of the film's great. We've mentioned it there on the cover with the green haze on the father's face as he's bleeding. But throughout the film, there's a lot of great scenes where the cinematography gives it an eerie otherworld feel, especially sort of like the scenes where the guy's a broken mirror, light reflects off the broken mirror, and the whole room lights up green or red. For me, for some reason, that's just always been eye-catching, and I love films that have cinematography that go a bit out there or use bold colours.
Yeah, I love lighting, and again, it's got a bit of a Dario Argento feel to it, as you said, with the striking colours used from the mirror, and the room's glowing. It has got some really cool lighting effects, so a bit of a giallo kind of feel to it, really.
In terms of the director, we haven't really touched upon him, but I think we should, because I'm a big fan of his. Director Lommel was an actor turned director, and he still would do a bit after he became a director, but he's better known for his directorial films. He did start directing in 1971, but personally for me, one of my favourites of his, which is early in his career, is The Tenderness of the Wolves. which is a very understated and creepy atmospheric horror film that's based on a real life serial killer.
There's an interesting thing I read actually as well, where Yuli was involved in Marion Dora's Cannibal film. He wanted that film to be made. Marion Dora made Cannibal because Yuli commissioned it to the true story of the German guy that found another guy, a gay guy, on an online website to fulfill his ultimate fantasy, which was to eat him and devour him, which was a real life thing that happened. It was very controversial and taboo because the guy that he ate consented to it and he homemade videoed it. It was a shocking story, and they wanted to make a film out of it. Marion Dora, who is less than tame, went and made the film Cannibal, and it was way too much for Yuli. It was too much for him, so he kind of stepped away, and it became an infamous underground film. But I found that very interesting that he was involved in that and was behind it initially in the early stages.
The Tenderness of the Wolves, it's similar sort of themes. Well, not quite, but there's a bit of cannibalism in there. But it was based on the Butcher of Hanover, the Wolfman. He was also known, Fritz Hamann, who. He just kills so many people in little crummy bedsit flats. And in The Tenderness of the Wolves, the film, I think Rommel just captures that atmosphere really well. It's such a grimy, downbeat film. If you've ever seen the TV show Rise and Damp, it's a bit like Rise and Damp, but more morbid. Rommel, of course, would also make other films that are known by cult horror fans. Some of them are my favourites. I think we've mentioned these in the past on podcasts, but he directed Double Jeopardy, which is also known as Olivia, but better known to VIPCO fans as Prozzy. And he also but he made the Devonsville Terror, which I think was a couple of years ago given a really good release by 88 Films.
Yes, it was, yeah. It got the Blu-ray treatment by them. Proz is another interesting one on the VIPCO catalogue, because that's yet another one where it never made it to screen time on the Black Case of Gold writing, but just continued to have the actual proper artwork, as with Bogeyman as well. It was like the more pristine releases of theirs. They released them and stuck by them, and until 88 released Prozzy on Blu-ray, Prozzy was a really sought after VIPCO title, went for silly money on DVD, and it was quite hard to get and very expensive to get. It had been devalued now because of 88's release, but interesting that both these films out on the catalogue never actually got the crap releases, so to speak, but got the more renowned ones.
Well, I have Prozzy on VIPCO DVD. I luckily got it quite cheap, but I had seen for a while, especially until the Blu-ray re-release, Prozzy was going for stupid money. But the VIPCO release has the quite strange cropped image of Susanna Love's face wearing sunglasses with Prozzy in light blue writing. I was going to say, out of all the 6 shots from that film that Mike could have used for a sleeve, I think that's quite tame in comparison to what could have been. With the Bogeyman, it was also given a Blu-ray and DVD re-release by 88 Films.
In the UK, between 88 Films and Arrow, they've picked up a hell of a lot of VIPCO's back catalogue.
But I was again, when I heard that they were releasing the Bogeyman on Blu-ray, I had to have it, even though I had an import DVD of this, and I had the VIPCO VHS of the Bogeyman. When I heard it was on Blu-ray, I had to have it. And Jason's right, in some ways you do like to watch these horror films in the way you would have consumed them originally on a gritty VHS, but seeing it on Blu-ray, especially with all the great cinematography and the strange lighting and the effects of the mirror, I say the Bogeyman has definitely benefited from being a Blu-ray film.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the not all of them you can say that for, but yeah, Bogeyman's definitely one where it stands a test of time, and you said that even with the new treatment, it looks slick, it looks good, and it does it justice. Seeing it in a clean print does make it even more, you appreciate the film even more. That can't be said for all of them. So that's saying that it's a, that itself speaks volumes. It was a well-made film and a well shot film.
That's the reason why we've reviewed this one here today, is because if you've already listened to our Driller Killer episode and Zombie Flesh Eaters episode, Jason and I have sort of agreed, and hope you agree, that in the early pre-cert days of VIPCO, there's 4 films that all happen to be video nasties that put VIPCO on the map. The Fab Four, or you could call them the Fright Four, but Zombie Flesh Eaters, Driller Killer, The Boogeyman, and Shogun Assassin are those 4 films, and that's why we've covered these for 3 films so far. But the next episode will be about Shogun Assassin.
Yeah, the unforgettable DVD they put out with the super duper widescreen.
So anyone listening, if you have any suggestions or ideas, if you want to mention that, you can find us on Twitter, as our Twitter handle for the podcast Strong Uncut podcast is simply at Strong Uncut Pod. If you want us to, if you think we should cover a certain VIPCO film in depth that we haven't mentioned before, or let us know. But this episode has been about the Bogeyman. Next one's about Shogun Assassin, and if people do input any ideas, then we might just go with what's been suggested by listeners.
I do highly recommend Bogeyman. If you've not seen it, definitely check it out. And if you're a VIPCO collector, it's definitely one to have. The preset's lovely, but I know presets are hard and expensive. The video's nice, but definitely the DVD. The DVD sits nicely, but it goes either end of your Scream Time collection, because I said it was never on the Scream Time, so it's a good one to have next to the Scream Time collection, along with Prozzy.
Yeah, well, I think if anyone would want to actually physically own this on a home video release that haven't got this already in their collection, if you can't get hold of a VIPCO release, that obviously there is the more readily available Blu-ray and DVD re-release from 88 Films, which I highly recommend, because, as I've said, the Blu-ray transfer makes the colours just really pop.
And the film holds up, so yeah, definitely worth grabbing if you're a collector and into your horror films.
So this is it for the Boogeyman, whatever you want to call it, episode of Strong Cut Podcast. I've been James Simpson. Our book should be coming out soon after this episode's gone live. Video Nasty Mayhem, available on Amazon, and apparently now it's available at Waterstones online and W.H. Smith's. And Jason, do you want to quickly shamelessly plug anything like I just did?
Yeah, I've been Jason Impey, and there is a VIPCO Untold Story Facebook page, and my feature documentary on VIPCO is very, very close to being released, and I can't wait to share the exciting release that's coming. But I'm under secret oath at the moment, but it's very close, and all will be revealed in this month of November 2019.
But that's the end of this episode. If you've liked it, let us know your thoughts. If you want us to cover another film in depth, let us know as well.